The steam from my coffee curled into the gray Seattle morning when my phone buzzed. A single message from my mother lit the screen. Christmas will be at Celeste's. Don't come, just that. No explanation, no love, only a sentence sharp enough to slice through bone. I stared at it, waiting for the words to change, but they didn't. They never do. My sister Celeste, polished and adored, has always been their golden child while I have been the shadow, forgotten at practice. My medals collecting dust while they clapped for her parties. My name is Rowena Calloway. I am a veteran, and I manage the evergreen estate worth $5 million that my grandfather left to me alone. That morning, something inside me cracked, but what rose wasn't a weakness. It was a certainty that this Christmas would not end the way my family imagined. I set the phone down and wrapped both hands around the mug, pressing into the heat as though it might stop the cold spreading through my chest. Outside drizzle threaded down the window, turning the city into blurred lights and shadows. The refrigerator hummed, a vent rattled softly. Life carried on. But I sat there frozen in place, staring at nothing. Memories crowded in uninvited. Every Christmas Eve I was pictured walking into their house, hearing the fire snap, smelling garlands and cinnamon, being asked where I'd like to sit. For years I held on to the thought that one day I would come home from service and they would look up, see me really see me. Instead, I was watching them vanish me with a single line of text. The thought of their living room tightened my chest. Celeste's fiancé pouring champagne, her voice filling every corner. My parents beaming at her as if she hung the stars. My chair wouldn't be empty, it would be gone, the way a shadow disappears under too much light. I wanted to call my mother to demand an explanation, to force her to hear what she had done, but I already knew how it would go. Her sigh, her calm tone dripping with judgment. Her insistence that I was overreacting, that I should be grateful for scraps. It had always been that way. Celeste's comfort outweighed my presence. The mug slipped from my hands and hit the counter harder than I meant. Coffee sloshing over the rim. The sound cracked through the silence like a shot. I pressed my palms flat against the cold granite, grounding myself. In that coldness, I heard my grandfather's voice, steady as if he were right behind me. The world doesn't owe you fairness. Rowena, you build your own. I had dismissed those words when I was younger, thinking he was just another stern man who didn't understand me. But standing in my kitchen phone, still glowing with rejection, his words hit like orders I could not ignore. I pushed back from the counter and started pacing. The hardwood groaned under my boots. Each step carried the same thought: they don't want you there. They never have. My reflection caught in the microwave door, dark circles under my eyes. Lips pressed tight, shoulders squared like I was bracing for a fight. I had fought in deserts and mountains, rifles in hand. But this fight was different. This one was about dignity. The phone pulsed once more on the counter, another notification, but I didn't look. I imagined my mother's voice telling me not to make a scene, telling me I was ungrateful, difficult. I knew the script by heart. I refused to give her that performance. Instead, I walked to the window, laying my hand against the glass. The drizzle smeared the view of evergreen trees heavy with wet, rooftops dripping. The faint glow of the city pressed under the weight of clouds. It should have felt isolating, but clarity cut through the loneliness. The message had been plain. There was no seat for me at their table. My breath left me in a long exhale, fogging the glass. Beneath the ache in my ribs and the knot in my throat, there was something steadier. They had made their choice, and now so had I. No more shrinking myself, no more hoping, no more begging for space in a family that preferred me invisible. I turned back to the kitchen. The mug sat cooling, a ring of coffee pooling at its base. The phone lay flat, its blue light finally gone dark. The silence pressed in, but it didn't crush me. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet as mine. I let my hand rest on the back of the chair, leather worn from years of use, then pulled it close and sat. My body was still buzzing, but my thoughts were sharp. I wasn't weak. I wasn't broken. I was free. My mind flicked back to the evergreen estate. Tall glass walls, dark wood beams, land stretching out to Lake Washington. Quiet and vast. The one thing my grandfather had placed in my hands without condition, without compromise. He hadn't left it to Celeste, hadn't let my parents control it. He had seen me, trusted me. It was mine, unshakable, untouchable. That thought steadied me, pulled me upright again. If they wanted me erased, I would not vanish. I didn't know exactly what would come next, but I knew it would not be silent. I stood and reached for my coat draped over the chair, the weight of it heavy and familiar. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, their jingle sharp in the stillness. Locking the door behind me, I stepped into the damp morning. The chill bit at my skin sharper than the coffee had ever been. My boots struck the pavement in a steady rhythm as I crossed to the car. The drizzle thickened, speckling the windshield as I slid into the driver's seat. The phone buzzed again on the console, but I ignored it. I turned the ignition engine rumbling alive, wipers beating back the rain. The message still echoed in my mind. Christmas will be at Celeste's. Don't come, but its sting had dulled. It no longer felt like a knife. It felt like clarity. I pulled onto the road, Seattle's streets slick with water, the city rising and fading behind the fog. Ahead lay the highway, the path that led straight to Evergreen. My hands tightened on the wheel, not with anger now, but with resolve. Behind me was rejection. Ahead was something else. As the rain came harder and the tires hissed against wet asphalt, I felt a steadiness I hadn't known in years. I was out. But being out no longer felt like an ending. It felt like the start of something that had been waiting for me all along. The highway carried me north, rain hammering harder now, the kind that smears the world into streaks of gray. The rhythm of the wipers drew me inward, back to places I usually kept locked. That text from my mother had cracked the lock wide open. Memories flooded uninvited, old wounds never really healed. They just waited. I first thought of 2010. I was 23, thinner, sharper around the edges. Standing at attention inside a drafty hangar at Joint Base Lewis McChord. A captain's voice echoed as he read off commendations. When my name was called, I stepped forward, pulse loud in my ears, and took the medal with a stiff salute. The clap of my unit filled the air. But when I turned, the row of folding chairs set aside for families sat half empty. I had reserved seats for them, certain they would come. Hours later, still wearing the ribbon, I scrolled my phone and saw my parents grinning under string lights at a Capitol Hill pop-up event Celeste was hosting for her blog. My mother had typed, "Proud of you, sweet girl." My father had written, "She amazes us every day." My chest had gone hollow as I closed the phone. I told myself duty meant not flinching even when the hit landed at home. Years earlier in high school, I had stood on a rain-slick track, the smell of wet grass thick in the air. It was the district meet. I was running the 400 legs, burning arms pumping, eyes searching the bleachers for one face. My father had promised he'd be there. When I finished chest heaving, I scanned the stands, only empty space. That night, he said he had to go support Celeste at a poetry reading in Ballard, that she needed someone in the front row. He told me I was strong enough to handle disappointment. I nodded and washed dishes after dinner, swallowing the ache in silence. These weren't isolated misses. They piled up like bricks. The family newsletter my mother emailed out every December rarely mentioned me even when I was overseas. If it did, it was a single line. Rowena is still serving. Meanwhile, Celeste's section stretched paragraphs long, photos attached of her smiling with friends, candles flickering behind her. It was a shrine in PDF form. The unfairness used to confuse me. I'd wonder if maybe I wasn't warm enough, if my blunt edges made me unlovable. Over time, I understood the pattern. My achievements lived in drawers folded and hidden. Celeste's were hung in frames, celebrated with cake. I was the steady shadow, she was the spectacle. There was one Thanksgiving I can never shake. I'd just come back from a deployment, still wearing the weight of sandstorms and long nights. I walked into their living room in my dress blues. For a heartbeat, I hoped the sight might stir something. My mother smiled thinly and said I looked intimidating. Celeste laughed and asked if I could change my boots because they didn't fit her rustic theme. Later, a neighbor asked if I was working security. I smiled and said logistics, too tired to explain further. I sat quietly through dinner, watching them laugh at Celeste's stories, my presence fading into the wallpaper. It wasn't that I hated my sister. At times, I even admired how easily she filled a room. But admiration soured when it became clear I would never be allowed to stand beside her, only behind. Celeste never had to fight for attention. She breathed and the spotlight found her. I bled and was told to keep it down. Then there was my grandfather, Augustus Calloway, the only one who seemed to see me fully. Summers at his estate outside Seattle were a refuge. He would hand me sandpaper and say, "Listen to the grain. Let the wood tell you when it's ready." He taught me to fix fences, dig post holes, and clear brush, work that blistered my palms but steadied my heart. He never once asked me to be less. He told me to take up space. When he passed in 2017, the will named me sole heir to Evergreen Estate. I sat stiff in the attorney's office while my parents' faces drained of color. Celeste blinked fast like it must have been a clerical mistake. But it was real, notarized, ironclad. My grandfather had left the estate to me, not them. His choice carried weight they couldn't contest. That night, Celeste called her voice syrup sweet. She said she was happy for me, but worried it might divide the family. She suggested we treat the place like a shared backdrop for holidays. I said I'd think about it. She didn't wait for me to answer before posting a photo from the estate. Porch captioned generational stories. She cropped me out. My memories tangled as the road unwound. The sound of tires against water filled the cabin steady as breath. Each moment flashed like a slide reel. The track meets. The hangar. The holiday dinners, always the same rhythm. Celeste at the center, me at the margins. The truth was no longer avoidable. That text this morning wasn't a surprise, not really. It was the natural continuation of years of being told without words that my presence was optional. Now it was spelled in black and white. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, the leather slick under my hands. My grandfather's voice returned. Don't wait for them to clap, Rowena. Clap for yourself. Build your own table if they won't give you one. I used to think it was just his way of telling me to toughen up. But maybe he had been preparing me all along, preparing me for the moment when I'd be pushed out so clearly that the only option left was to stop begging and start building. The rain softened as I exited the highway. The world opened to trees heavy with water, the lake stretching steel gray under the low sky. The estate lay beyond waiting. It was more than land. It was proof. Proof that someone in my bloodline believed I deserved a place. Proof that I could root myself without their permission. The memories still stung, but something in me shifted as I drove closer. They no longer felt like weights dragging me down. They felt like fuel. Years of neglect had clarified one thing. I could never make myself enough for them. But I could make something of my own. I pressed down on the gas. The road curved the lake, flashing through the trees. The estate waited just ahead, and with it the chance to decide how the next chapter of my life would ride. The rain slowed as I turned onto the narrow road that curved along the edge of Lake Washington. Trees pressed close on both sides, evergreens so tall their tops vanished into mist. My tires crunched over gravel as I pulled through the stone gateposts, the ones my grandfather had refused to replace even when my parents called them dated. Ahead, Evergreen Estate rose out of the gray morning like a fortress and a refuge all at once. Glass walls caught what little light the sky offered, panes stretching 2 stories high. The main house stood broad and quiet, cedar siding darkened by years of storms, steel beams strong as bones, 8 bedrooms, 4 fireplaces, a wraparound deck that looked over the lake. It wasn't ostentatious in the way Celeste liked to flaunt her taste, but there was nothing modest about it either. The place spoke in its own language, solid, enduring, rooted. I parked near the garage, cut the engine, and sat for a moment. Rain ticked against the windshield, softer now, like a drum winding down. This land had been mine since 2017, the day the attorney read my grandfather's will in a room so still you could hear the rustle of paper. My parents had stiffened in their chairs. Celeste had blinked like she'd swallowed something bitter. But the words were unshakable. A notarized will ironclad with my name on every page. No one could contest it. My grandfather had made sure. I stepped out into the damp air. The smell of pine and wet earth wrapped around me instantly. Gravel shifted under my boots as I walked toward the house. The tall windows reflected the lake behind me, rippling silver through the drizzle. I pulled the keys from my pocket, the brass cool in my hand, and unlocked the door. Inside, the familiar hush greeted me. The foyer opened wide with stone floors that kept their chill no matter the season. To the right, the dining room stretched long. The oak table still scarred from years of meals repairs and conversations that mattered. To the left, the living room framed the lake through its massive windows, the kind of view that could stop your breath on clear days when Mount Rainier showed itself in the distance. I dropped my coat over a chair and let my fingers skim the banister of the staircase. Every corner of this place carried my grandfather's touch. The bookshelves are lined with volumes on history and carpentry. The barn doors at the back that he sanded until they shone, even the uneven floors in the upstairs hallway that he refused to fix, saying imperfection kept a house honest. Memories pressed in with the scent of cedar. Summers, when I followed him through the forest trails, his steady voice taught me how to read bark and moss like maps. Winters, when we sat by the fireplace, him with black coffee, me with hot cocoa, listening as he told stories of working 2 jobs during the war just to keep the family afloat. He never wasted words. When he spoke, it mattered. One memory rose louder than the rest. I was 15 raw from another fight with my parents. Aching from being overlooked again, I sat on this very staircase, arms wrapped tight around my knees, and he came to sit beside me. He didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. He just looked out the window at the lake, then said, "If they won't give you a seat, build your own table." At the time, I thought he meant resilience in the vague way adults spoke to teenagers. But today, walking into the dining room, I felt the weight of his words as if he were still here. The oak table stretched the length of the room, long enough for 20, maybe more. My hand traced the surface, feeling grooves where we once laid tools, marks where hot pans had scarred the finish. This table had been built to hold people, to hold noise and warmth and argument. My parents had called it impractical. My grandfather called it necessary. I walked through the kitchen next. The double ovens gleaming even in low light. The wide counters my grandfather and I had sanded down one summer until our hands blistered. He said a kitchen was the heart of any house. You feed people, you keep them alive. Simple as that. Upstairs, the bedrooms waited, each one with its own view of either forest or water. 8 in total, more than enough space for anyone who wanted to belong. My parents used to joke that the estate was too big, too costly, more trouble than it was worth. Celeste said it smelled like old wood and disappointment. I never argued. I knew they didn't see it. This house wasn't a burden. It was freedom. I returned to the main floor and stood at the window facing the lake. Rain spattered the surface, breaking it into 1,000 ripples. The water looked endless even though I knew its boundaries well. How many times had my grandfather stood here, hands behind his back, surveying what he'd built and preserved? He left it to me not as a gift, but as a charge. "Not everyone gets land like this, Rowena," he once said. "Use it well." The estate didn't just hold his possessions, it held his faith in me. When the rest of the family looked past me, he looked directly. He saw someone worth investing in, someone who could take care of what mattered. That belief was carved into the deed as clearly as his signature. I pressed my palm to the cool glass. His words echoed again, steady and certain. "If they won't give you a seat, build your own table." That sentence, once abstract, now felt like instruction. My family had closed their doors to me. But here, surrounded by glass and cedar and pine, I had all the space I needed to open mine. I stepped back from the window and let my eyes settle on the oak table. Once more, long-scarred waiting. A place not for hierarchy, not for favorites, but for anyone willing to sit. The morning's text still burned in my pocket, but its sting was already shifting into fuel. They had erased me. My grandfather had made sure I had the tools to draw myself back in. The estate was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like a stage set for something not yet written. My heartbeat steadied as I stood in the center of the dining room, the house holding me the way my family never had. The rain eased outside light, returning in slivers through the trees. Evergreen Estate stood firm mine in every sense of the word. And for the first time that day, I felt the faint stirrings of possibility. The house was quiet except for the rain pattering against the windows. I had been walking in circles through the dining room, the oak table stretching long and empty when my phone buzzed again. The sound jolted me. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be Celeste, ready to scold me for daring to look hurt, or my mother with one of her clipped explanations that always left me feeling smaller. But when I glanced down at the screen, my chest eased. It was Aunt Marjorie. I swiped to answer. "Hello!" Her voice burst through, sharp and furious. "Rowena Calloway, don't you dare tell me what I just heard is true." I gripped the phone tighter. "What exactly did you hear that your mother sent out some ridiculous group message saying Christmas is at Celeste's and you're not invited?" I nearly dropped my roses when I saw it. Please tell me she didn't actually do that. The shame I'd been swallowing since morning rose hot in my throat. She did. There was a hiss of air, then silence. And then Marjorie unleashed what I'd been aching to hear all day. "Unbelievable. Elaine has completely lost her mind. And don't even get me started on your sister. That girl has been spoiled since she could walk. Well, enough is enough. Listen to me, Rowena. You don't sit there licking your wounds. You take that beautiful house of yours and you host Christmas yourself." I froze at her words. What Marjorie, that's not what she cut in her voice, rising. "Not the tradition. Not how your parents have dictated holidays since before you could drive. Who cares? Family isn't about rules written by people who don't even see you. Family is about who shows up, and clearly they don't. So you create it yourself. Evergreen Estate has more room than any of their houses put together. You've got that massive oak table, those fireplaces, the space to breathe. Host it there." I moved toward the window, staring out at the lake where the rain fell in sheets. "They'd never come. You know that. I'm not talking about them." Her tone softened just slightly. "Invite people who actually matter. People who've been there for you. I'll be first through the door. And I'll bring my pecan pie, the one that makes people fight for the last slice. Not that sugar-dusted store nonsense your mother buys at Safeway. We'll fill that table with people who care. I closed my eyes, listening. My aunt had always been like this, brash, unfiltered, unwilling to bend herself into the neat shape the rest of the family demanded. She wore scarves in colors so bright they clashed, laughed too loud, and built her own flower shop when everyone else insisted she needed a real job. My mother called her difficult. I called her necessary. Still, hesitation dug its claws into me. Marjorie, it's not about pies or decorations. Hosting Christmas isn't simple. And I don't want to turn it into some kind of revenge stunt. Revenge, she repeated, a laugh bubbling up through her outrage. Honey, this isn't about revenge, it's about reclamation. You reclaim what they've stolen from you year after year. They want you erased, fine. You write yourself back in by making your own tradition. Besides, she added dryly, if Celeste happens to choke on the news, I'll consider it an early gift. A smile tugged at my lips despite the heaviness in my chest. You really think I could pull it off? Marjorie's reply came quickly. Rowena, you've led missions overseas, managed estates, handled more chaos in 1 year than most of us could survive in a lifetime. You're telling me you can't roast a turkey and light some candles? Let out a slow laugh, shaking my head. The estate loomed around me, glass walls catching dim light. Fireplaces waiting cold and empty. It could be done. More than that, it almost seemed as if the house had been built for it. Marjorie's voice softened again. You've always been the strong one. But strength doesn't mean swallowing hurt alone. Let people come to you. Let them sit at your table, Rowena. Not theirs, yours. When we finally ended the call, I stood in the silence for a long moment, the phone heavy in my hand. Her words still burned hot in my ears. Host Christmas at the estate. The thought felt too big, too foreign. For years, I'd been conditioned to believe holidays belonged to my parents, and Celeste, that my role was to show up quietly or not at all. But as I walked back into the dining room, something shifted. I saw the oak table not as a reminder of absence, but as possibility. I pictured it lined with plates and candles, voices rising in laughter, the crackle of fire behind us. I pictured no head of the table, no hierarchy, no one shoved to the edges. I paced the room, my boots echoing off the floorboards. Could I really do it? Could I open the estate and make it mine? Not theirs, I imagined Marjorie setting down her pie. My old neighbors arriving with dishes, maybe even a few faces from my service days who understood loyalty better than any bloodline. The image grew warmer, clearer. Finally, I walked into the study, pulled open the drawer of my grandfather's old walnut desk, and found his leather notebook still waiting. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Half were filled with his scrawled lists, repairs needed, seeds ordered, debts owed and repaid. The rest were blank. I flipped to an empty page, set the book down flat, and picked up a pen. My hand hovered for a moment, then pressed firm to paper. In block letters, I wrote Operation Evergreen Christmas. The ink bled into the page, bold and certain. I stared at the words, feeling the weight of them anchor something inside me. This wasn't just an idea now, it was a mission. I sat back, the leather cool under my palm, and exhaled. The rain outside had eased to a soft drizzle, the lake shimmering through the glass in rippled silver. For the first time since the morning's text, my chest felt less like a hollow wound and more like a place filled with purpose. I closed the notebook gently and set it in the center of the desk. It caught a shaft of light, looking almost like a command waiting to be executed. My boots sounded steady as I crossed the room again. The estate no longer felt empty. It felt alive, ready. They had chosen to erase me. But here on this land with this table, I would choose something else. The leather notebook lay open on the desk, the words Operation Evergreen Christmas staring back at me like a directive. My hand still tingled from writing them. The estate was big enough, the table long enough, the kitchen strong enough. But none of that mattered without people to fill it. I thought of the faces who had shown up for me when my family didn't. They came easily, as if waiting at the edge of my mind. First was Silas. At 40, a firefighter who had lived 2 doors down from me for years, he had never once hesitated to check on the house when I was away. One winter when my furnace failed, he showed up in uniform pants and boots, tightening valves until heat roared back. I pulled out my phone and dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly but warm. Rowena, are you back in town or just hiding from the rain, Ek? I said. Listen, I'm hosting Christmas at the estate this year. No politics, no favorites. Just people who want to be there. You in? There was a pause, then a laugh. You serious at Evergreen? Hell yes, I'm in. Do you need me to bring a fire extinguisher too? Wouldn't hurt, I replied, smiling for real this time. After hanging up, I scrawled his name into the notebook, underlining it twice. Next came Thalia, a professor I'd met during night classes when I was trying to piece together life after active duty. She was the kind of friend who never asked why I was quiet, only offered coffee, and let me sit in her office until words came back. I texted her short and deliberate, hosting Christmas. My table, my rules. Want in? Her reply came quickly. Finally count me in. I'll bring a sweet potato casserole that makes students line up like it's free tuition. I added her to the list, my handwriting tightening with purpose. Then Jonas. He and I had shared nights in dust storm, ducking fire and leaning on each other when the weight grew too heavy. He had drifted since leaving service, working odd jobs keeping distance. I wasn't sure he'd answer, but I called anyway. On the third ring, his rough voice came. Monroe, are you alive? Barely, I said, falling into old banter. I need you at my table for Christmas. Silence stretched long. You know I don't do holidays, neither do I. That's why this one's different. Real table, real people. No ghosts pretending to be family. Another pause, then a long exhale. You drive a hard bargain. Fine. But if someone serves pumpkin pie, I'm out. Noted, I said, grinning as I wrote his name. Harlan came next. A former engineer who had patched more than one vehicle I thought was scrap. He was steady as stone. When I called, he didn't hesitate. If you're running it, I'm in. I'll bring tools just in case your estate needs a little reinforcement. The list grew. Alyssa was trickier. A cousin, yes, but different. A nurse with more grit than most soldiers I'd known, she had always slipped me extra rolls at family dinners, whispered jokes when conversations turned sharp. I worried she'd feel trapped between loyalty to her parents and to me. But when I reached her, her answer came without hesitation. Rowena, I've been waiting for you to do this. Lily's been asking about you non-stop. She cried when she saw that message from your mom. We're in. Just tell us when. At the sound of Lily's name, something in my chest cracked open. 10 years old, sharp eye, never fooled by the politeness adults hid behind. She was one of the few reasons I had endured those family tables at all. If she wanted to come, there was no question. By the next afternoon, the estate wasn't quiet anymore. Silas pulled into the drive with Jonas riding shotgun, the two of them climbing out with tool belts slung low. That porch railing of yours has been wobbling since last winter, Silas said. Consider it handled. Jonas grunted his agreement, already hauling lumber from Silas's truck. They worked side by side without needing instructions, boards thudding, nails biting wood. Every swing of the hammer echoed like an agreement I hadn't dared to hope for. Later, Thalia arrived in her old station wagon, Alyssa in the passenger seat, Lily bursting out before the car had even stopped rolling. The girl ran up the porch steps, hair flying, a shoebox clutched in her hands. I folded napkins for your table, she declared, thrusting the box into my arms. Inside were dozens of paper triangles, some crooked, some perfect. They're better than anything I could do, I told her, my voice catching. She beamed, then darted off to explore the kitchen. Meanwhile, Thalia stepped inside with a box of books and candles. Atmosphere matters, she said, setting them on the counter. Alyssa followed, already rolling up her sleeves. Where do you keep the serving platters? We should start checking what you'll need. The house filled with motion. Tools clanged outside, voices rose inside. Laughter bounced off cedar beams. For once, Evergreen didn't feel like a mausoleum of memories. It felt alive. That evening, when the cars had gone and silence settled again, I sat at the desk with the notebook open. The pages filled with names: Silas, Thalia, Jonas, Harlan, Alyssa, Lily. Each one carried weight proof that I wasn't building this alone. I leaned back, tapping the pen against the leather cover. The lists I'd started: food quantities, seating arrangements. Backup plans spread across the desk. The rhythm of it felt familiar. This wasn't just a holiday anymore, it was a mission. Logistics, allies, contingencies. Operation Evergreen Christmas was no different from the operations I'd planned overseas, except this battlefield was a dining room. And the goal was belonging. The realization made me laugh quietly, the sound echoing in the quiet room. For once, the mission wasn't survival, it was a joy. I closed the notebook, slid it to the center of the desk, and rested my hand on top. Outside, the rain had stopped, the lake reflecting the last faint light of day. The estate stood ready, and now so did I. The estate was no longer silent by the time the weekend came. Cars crunched up the gravel drive one after another, headlights slicing through the gray Seattle drizzle. Doors slammed, voices rose, boots stamped mud onto the porch. Evergreen was waking up. Silas came first, carrying coils of extension cord slung over his shoulders like ropes. his firefighter's jacket streaked with soot from an overnight call. He tipped his chin at me. "We're making this place brighter than downtown. Show me where you want the ladder." Jonas slid out of the passenger side, hauling 2 propane heaters strapped in the bed of the truck. His eyes scanned the house with the same calm he used to sweep rooftops in Kandahar. "The cold's not stopping us. Let's set these up near the barn." Behind them came Harlan toolbox in one hand, a bundle of wires in the other. He barely greeted anyone before kneeling by the breaker box, muttering about outdated fuses and load limits. "If you want lights, heaters, and ovens running at once, we do this right or the whole place goes dark." Inside, Thalia appeared with her arms full of boxes. She dropped them on the dining table, pulling out card decks and trivia games. "Distraction is important," she said, brushing hair from her eyes. "If people laugh, they argue less." Alyssa trailed her with 2 bulging tote bags. She started unloading bandages, antacids, and small kits onto the counter. "Holiday first aid," she explained. "Cuts, burns, stomach aches. Families plus food equals trouble." And then there was Lily. She barreled in a shoebox, tucked against her chest. "I made ornaments," she announced breathlessly. Each one was cut from cardboard ribbon tied clumsily at the top. A name scrawled across the front. Everybody gets one. That way nobody feels left out. Her certainty made me swallow hard. "Perfect, Lily. Let's hang them where everyone can see." The day unraveled into motion. Silas climbed a ladder propped against the side of the house, balancing a coil of lights across his shoulder. Jonas braced the ladder feet steady in the mud. "Even lines," he called up. "If it's crooked, she'll know." "I always know," I said from the porch, arms crossed. Both men chuckled. Harlan prowled the breaker panel, his voice low but certain. "This outlet's weak. Rewiring now. Don't plug anything until I say." He looked like a man solving a puzzle only he could see. Inside, Thalia spread trivia cards across the oak table while Alyssa checked. Expiration dates on bandages. Their laughter floated out through the open window. I moved slowly through it all, taking it in. For years, the estate had been too big for one voice, its halls echoing with absence. Now the rooms pulsed with footsteps, instructions, clattering tools. The house felt different. Rowena Lily's voice cut sharp. I turned to see her perched on a dining chair, stretching on tiptoe to hang one of her ornaments high on the tree. The chair wobbled beneath her small frame. My heart clenched. Before I could cross the room, Jonas was there. He caught the back of the chair, steadying it with one hand and plucking the ornament from hers with the other. "You're gonna give your aunt gray hair," he muttered, setting her gently on the floor. Lily scowled up at him. "I wanted it higher." "Then ask me next time," he said. "Soldiers climb. Kids don't." Her lip wobbled, but then he hung the ornament exactly where she'd wanted it, high enough to catch the glow from the string lights. Her grin spread wide. My knees went weak with relief. Not long after, another jolt came. Silas shouted from the porch. "Power's out here. Check the panel." The strand of bulbs along the eaves had flickered once and gone dark. The ladder rattled as he climbed down. For a second, all the chatter stopped. The house dipped into uneasy silence. I felt the old dread crawl up, the kind that whispered things fall apart. "Nothing holds." But then Harlan's calm voice called from the breaker. "Just a surge. I've got it." He flicked switches with methodical precision. A hum filled the walls. Then the lights blinked alive again, brighter than before. Lily clapped her hands. "It's like magic." I pressed my palm against the porch rail, forcing a shaky breath out. Not magic, I thought. People who knew how to catch things before they broke. People who showed up. By late afternoon, evergreens shimmered. Strings of lights draped from the porch beams, wrapping around railings, trailing toward the barn. The heaters Jonas set up glowed red under the canopy, throwing warmth into the cold air. Thalia arranged candles across windowsills, flames dancing against glass. Alyssa tucked first aid kits into corners, humming as if already anticipating the chaos of the day itself. And Lily, relentless, hung every last ornament until the house seemed to wear their names like armor. I stood in the dining room staring through the tall glass walls. Outside, the estate glowed against the dark, lights spilling across wet grass and rippling off the lake. The house no longer looked like an isolated relic. It looked alive. Behind me, the others drifted, in each one marked by the work of the day. Silas brushed sawdust off his sleeves. "The place looks better than half the parades I've worked fire detail for." Jonas cracked open a bottle of water, his face still grim but softer at the edges. "It'll hold. Stronger than it looks." Thalia lit one last candle, her eyes bright. "Game's ready. Trivia charades, even a kid's scavenger hunt." Alyssa eased into a chair, rubbing her back. "No one will bleed out on my watch. unless it's cranberry sauce. And Lily, cheeks flushed, twirled under the glow of the bulbs. The house is smiling, she whispered, like she was sharing a secret. Her words stopped me cold. I looked again at the reflection in the glass, at the lights pouring warmth across the estate, at the shadows of people moving with purpose inside. For years, I had believed Evergreen was too heavy, too empty, a burden left to me alone. But with laughter rising and lights glowing, it felt transformed. I touched the notebook on the table, the one where Operation Evergreen Christmas stretched bold across the first page. The plan wasn't just ink anymore. It was here, breathing, shining. For the first time, I let the truth land. This wasn't about the family who shut me out. It was about the family gathering now, one I hadn't expected, but one I had chosen. The generator kicked once more, the bulbs flaring brighter before settling into steady glow. My chest swelled. They had wanted me erased. But here in the house my grandfather built and left in my hands, I was finally watching something better take shape. The lights outside had just steadied into their warm glow when my phone lit up on the table. Celeste's name glared across the screen, sharp against the soft hum of voices filling the dining room. For a second, I considered letting it ring out, the way I had so many times before, but something in me tightened. Not tonight, I swiped to answer. Her voice burst through at once, high and clipped. What are you doing, Rowena? Are you seriously hosting some ridiculous event at that drafty, old estate? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? My jaw clenched, but before I could speak, she kept going, her words tumbling like stones. You're dividing the family. You're turning people against us. Mom and Dad are furious. And you, I set the phone down in the center of the table and tapped the speaker. The room hushed. Silas leaned back in his chair, arms folded. Jonas's eyes narrowed. Thalia's lips pressed tight. Lily stood frozen by the tree ornament still in her hand. Celeste's voice spilled into the silence, sharp and brittle. You think this makes you look strong? It makes you look pathetic. You were told not to come because you stir up trouble. And now you're proving us right by creating this circus. For a moment, heat surged in my chest. Years of biting my tongue itched to lash out. But instead, I leaned forward, my voice even. I didn't divide this family, Celeste. You did every time you made sure there was no place for me. There was a beat of silence on her end, then a scoff. Don't twist this. You've always been dramatic, desperate for attention. This little stunt of yours is just another example. You can't stand not being the center. Lily's voice piped up small but clear. That's not true. All eyes turned toward her, but she kept her chin high. Here everyone has a seat. Nobody gets shoved away. The words struck sharper than anything I could have said. The room stilled. Even through the line, I could feel Celeste falter. You put her up to that, Celeste hissed finally. Dragging a child into your pity party, that's low even for you. Don't talk about her like that, I said, my tone sharpening for the first time. She speaks for herself, and she sees the truth better than you ever have. Celeste's voice rose brittle and furious. You're ruining everything. Mom and Dad will never forgive this. Do you really think anyone respectable will choose you over us? You sound delusional. I straightened my hands flat on the table, my voice steady. I don't need them to choose me. I'm not the one who needed to erase a sister just to feel secure. I wasn't cut from this family, Celeste. You cut me out. The words landed heavier than I expected, echoing in the silence that followed. Around me, no one moved. Silas's jaw tightened. Jonas's eyes locked on mine as if telling me to hold the line. Celeste's breath came ragged through the speaker. You'll regret this. You can play soldier all you want, but you're still alone out there. And when everyone gets tired of your games, you'll come crawling back. I looked around the table, at Thalia arranging candles with calm defiance, at Alyssa resting a steady hand on Lily's shoulder, at Silas and Jonas sitting like sentinels, at Harlan in the doorway with his arms crossed. The sight swelled in my chest. I'm not alone, I said quietly but firmly. For the first time, Celeste's voice cracked. You're embarrassing yourself. You think this is family? These are just scraps you gathered to make. Yourself feel better. Jonas's voice cut through low and gravelly. Funny. Feels more like a unit than anything I've seen from your side. Celeste sputtered, stunned at the intrusion. But before she could recover, Lily spoke again, stronger this time. I like this family better. Nobody yells at me here. The silence on the other end stretched taut and cold. I could almost picture her face lips pressed, thin eyes blazing. Finally, she spat the words. You'll never be more than the shadow Rowena. Hosting one dinner won't change that. I let out a slow breath, the anger draining into something steadier. Maybe I am a shadow to you, but in this house, in this light, I am enough. I pressed the button and ended the call. The phone went dark, its reflection dull against the polished wood. For a moment no one spoke. The quiet was thick, heavy with the weight of what had just passed. Then Silas whistled low. "Well," he muttered, leaning back, "guess she knows where you stand now." Laughter rippled softly, not mocking but releasing tension. Thalia shook her head, a small smile breaking through. "I never thought I'd see you say it out loud." Alyssa squeezed my arm. "You didn't flinch, not once." Lily climbed into the chair beside me, slipping her small hand into mine. "You didn't let her win." I squeezed back, my throat tight. The words replayed in my head, steady as stone. I wasn't cut from the family, she cut me out. And saying it aloud in front of the people who chose to be here felt like the first time I had taken back something stolen long ago. I looked out through the glass walls again. The lights glowed steady against the night, reflecting off the lake in fractured gold. Inside, voices rose once more, chairs scraped, laughter returned. Evergreen had withstood the storm of her call, and what remained felt stronger. By the time dusk fell over Lake Washington, Evergreen gleamed like a jewel against the black water. Strings of lights traced the eaves and wrapped the porch beams, their golden glow spilling over the wet gravel. Through the tall glass windows, the dining hall shimmered as if it had been waiting all these years for this very night. The oak table stretched long under a heavy red cloth, candles flickering in clusters, silverware catching the light. Platters of roasted meats and bowls of glazed vegetables sent their scents into the air, mingling with gingerbread cooling on racks by the kitchen. Cinnamon and pine lingered in every breath. The tree stood in the far corner, towering nearly 15 feet, its top brushing the beams. Ribbons of silver wound around branches heavy with ornaments. At the peak sat the star Lily had cut from yellow paper, uneven edges, tape showing at the seams. Somehow it belonged there more than crystal or gold ever could. Silas carried a tray of steaming cider into the room, setting mugs along the table. Careful hot, he warned, though his grin betrayed his pride. Jonas leaned near the fire, shoulders tense as always, but his eyes softened when Harlan teased him about the scarf wrapped snug around his neck. Thalia coaxed voices toward the piano, her hands sweeping across keys until the first notes of a carol filled the air. Hesitant at first, the singing grew stronger, laughter weaving into the melody. Alyssa moved quietly among them, topping off cups, pressing bread into waiting hands. I stood apart for a moment near the wide window, letting the scene wash over me. For years, Evergreen had been hollow, its rooms echoing only with my footsteps. Tonight it pulsed with warmth, every corner alive with sound. When the carols ended, Thalia clapped her hands and called everyone to the tree. Packages of all shapes and sizes waited beneath it. Names scrawled in Lily's uneven handwriting. She bounced in excitement, calling each person forward. Her cheeks flushed red from the fire. Silas tore into his and held up a shiny new thermos. "Finally, one that doesn't leak all over my truck," he said. And the room laughed. Jonas unwrapped a thick wool scarf, dark gray and practical. He ran the fabric through his fingers and nodded once, a gesture heavier than words. Harlan grinned at a pair of work gloves, pulling them on immediately. "Now I can fix the porch when it snows," he joked, and Lily squealed with approval. Thalia's eyes lit as she unwrapped a stack of journals, crisp pages waiting for her pen. She hugged them close, whispering that it was perfect. Alyssa carefully opened hers to find a framed photograph of Evergreen in summer green fields rolling to the lake. "It looks alive," she murmured, her voice barely above the hush in the room. And then Lily dug out a flat package wrapped in wrinkled paper and walked it over to me. She held it with both hands, her eyes glowing. "This one's for you." I unwrapped it slowly, fingers careful on the taped seams. Inside was a drawing done in bold crayon. A long table stretched across the page, every chair filled with stick figures labeled with names. At the top, in large, uneven letters, she had written "My Real Family Christmas." My breath caught. For a moment, the room faded. All I saw was the waxy lines, the crowded table, the words she had written with such certainty. Lily looked up at me, her voice clear. "I wanted you to have it so you never forget. You made a table where nobody gets left out." I bent down and pulled her into my arms. My voice cracked as I whispered "thank you" into her hair. Her small frame pressed steady against me, warm and real. When I set her down, the silence in the room was thick, not awkward but full. Silas gave a slow nod. Jonas's gaze stayed locked on me. Thalia blinked away quick tears. Alyssa touched my shoulder gently. Even Harlan, never one for sentiment, cleared his throat and looked away. I placed the drawing at the center of the table, propped against a candle. The flames reflected across the waxy surface, making it shine. Carols started again, softer this time, voices blending with the fire's crackle, Even Jonas rumbled a low harmony. The music rose up to the beams and curled into the corners, filling spaces that had long been silent. I drifted back toward the window. Outside the estate glowed against the dark, lights shimmering across the lake, the house no longer a fortress but a beacon. I could see our reflections in the glass gathered at the table, laughter spilling into the night. For the first time in years, I wasn't standing at the edges. I was inside exactly where I belonged. The smell of gingerbread thickened as another tray came out of the oven. Alyssa passed cookies around. Lily pressed one into my hand. "This is how Christmas is supposed to feel," she declared. I laughed softly, holding the cookie, my eyes stinging again. I looked once more at her drawing. My real family Christmas. For the first time, the words didn't feel fragile or borrowed. They felt true. The night swelled with voices clinking glasses, the tree shimmering with every movement. It felt whole, unshakable. Yet as I stood there savoring it, a faint unease threaded through me. Maybe it was memory, maybe instinct. For so long, the people outside these walls had decided where I belonged. A gust of wind rattled the porch door loud enough to turn heads. Silas glanced up, frowning. The sound faded, swallowed again by laughter, but my chest tightened. Through the window, I caught the sweep of headlights moving down the long drive, cutting sharp beams across the trees. I set Lily's drawing down carefully, my pulse quickening. The voices around me carried on carols, blending into chatter, but my eyes stayed fixed on those approaching lights. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the wreath Lily had proudly hung that morning. The first strike had startled everyone, but the second carried weight, as if demanding the house itself acknowledge who stood outside. My stomach tightened. The chatter behind me dissolved into silence. I crossed the hall slowly, each step loud against the wood. My hand hovered over the latch for a moment, steadying my breath. Then I pulled the door wide. Cold December air rushed in. My father stood tall on the porch, coat buttoned high, jaw clenched so tight I could almost hear the grind of his teeth. My mother was beside him, her gloves in one hand, her lips pressed in that familiar thin line. Neither smiled. Neither even said hello. "Rowena," my mother said sharply, her voice cutting like glass. "We need to talk." I leaned against the frame, blocking the view inside. "Talk here." My father's brow furrowed. "Don't be absurd. Invite us in. We won't have this conversation on the porch." I let the pause hang long enough for him to feel it. Then, deliberately, I stepped back at a single pace. Not for obedience, but for choice. They swept past me with the air of inspectors, eyes darting to the garlands, the coats by the door, the glow of candles spilling from the dining room. My mother's gaze lingered on the ornaments Lily had hung earlier, each scribbled with names. Her frown deepened. "So this is what you've done?" "It's Christmas," I answered evenly. With strangers, my father snapped, his tone carrying the judgment I had heard my whole life. With family, I said louder than I meant to. The word echoed in the hall, and even I felt its truth shake something loose in me. We entered the dining hall together, though it felt like a collision of two worlds. The room had been alive only minutes before, filled with Carol's laughter and the glow of firelight. Now it held its breath. Silas leaned back in his chair, his arms folded tight across his chest, watching. Jonas straightened near the fire, shoulders, broad gaze, sharp. A soldier waiting for orders. Thalia sat with a songbook in her lap, her fingers curled against the pages. Alyssa pulled Lily a little closer, the girl clutching her drawing to her chest like a shield. My mother's eyes swept the table, then fixed on Marjorie. "You encouraged this," she said, her voice flat, but sharp enough to slice the room in two. Marjorie didn't blink. She rose slowly, one hand resting against the oak table. "I encouraged someone to finally treat Rowena with respect." The fire cracked. My father's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing. "This is childish," he said. "Running off to hide in this house, pretending you've built something meaningful. You're trying to humiliate us, to prove a point." My shoulders straightened, the tremor in my hands stilled. "Evergreen is mine," I said. "Grandfather left it to me in his will. Signed, notarized beyond dispute. Not to Celeste, not to you, me. And I decide who sits at this table." For the first time, my mother faltered. Surprise flickered across her face before she masked it again. My father's lips pressed thinner, the cords in his neck standing out. "You think a deed makes you family?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "No," I said quietly, though the words carried like steel. "It means I don't need your permission anymore." The silence was suffocating. Even the fire seemed to quiet, its crackle swallowed by the weight of the moment. Finally, my mother spoke. "You've embarrassed us tonight." My chest burned, but my voice stayed calm. "No. You embarrassed yourselves years ago, When you decided one child deserved everything and the other deserved nothing. Tonight I stopped pretending that was normal. Her eyes flicked toward Lily. The little girl stood small but unflinching, her chin raised in stubborn courage. "Don't drag her into this," my mother snapped. "She came because she wanted to," I said. "She knows where she belongs." Lily's voice piped up soft but steady. "I like it here." "Nobody forgets me here." The words landed heavier than any accusation. My mother's face went pale. My father shifted uncomfortable but still said nothing. I turned my gaze back to them, letting the silence stretch. My heart pounded, but my voice came out steady. "I will not beg for scraps anymore. This estate is mine and so is this table. If you wanted me erased, you got your wish. But you don't get to walk into this house and tell me who belongs." My father's eyes locked on mine. I braced myself, waiting for anger for a lecture, for the weight of his disappointment to crush me again. Instead, he only exhaled sharply, his jaw twitching once. Then he turned without a word and strode toward the door. My mother hesitated, her eyes sweeping the table one last time, pausing on Marjorie, then on Lily before following him. Her heels struck the wood like gavel blows. They crossed the threshold in silence. No slammed doors, no shouted threats, just their absence swallowing the space they left behind. For a long moment I stood there, the door closed, my back pressed against it, my pulse hammered in my ears. The house was silent, everyone frozen. Then I turned. Every face met mine. Marjorie's eyes glistened fierce with pride. Silas gave a slow, deliberate nod. Jonas's expression was unreadable, but his posture relaxed, as if a burden had shifted. Alyssa rubbed Lily's shoulder, the girl still gripping her drawing, her eyes shining with defiance. The tightness in my chest released, replaced by something steady. Not relief, not triumph, strength. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid of their leaving. Their absence no longer meant erasure. It meant freedom. I walked back to the table, each step lighter than the one before, and slid into my chair. The firelight flickered across the oak, catching the crayon drawing propped in the center. My real family. Christmas. The words glowed as if they had been waiting for this very moment. Slowly, voices returned. A chair scraped, a laugh cracked the silence, then another. Conversation picked up, cautious at first, then stronger, until the room was alive again. Evergreens stood tall around us, unshaken. Through the glass wall, I caught a glimpse of red taillights vanishing down the long drive. Swallowed by the dark pines, I did not move to follow. For the first time I had no need. Inside Evergreen was full. The estate belonged to me, but more than that, it belonged to those who had chosen to sit at this table. Their presence filled the air with something my parents had never managed. To give belonging. The fire popped again, louder this time, as if punctuating the moment. I glanced at Lily's drawing and smiled, my shoulders easing. Whatever came tomorrow, tonight had been won. The house had shifted by the time the plates were scraped clean. The noise that had filled the Evergreen estate only hours earlier had softened into the clatter of dishes, the shuffle of chairs, and the low hum of conversation. I rolled up my sleeves and joined the others, stacking plates into neat towers, carrying trays back to the kitchen. It felt natural, easy, the way a family should move together when the big meal is done. Harlan uncorked a bottle of bourbon he had tucked away in his bag, pouring it into mismatched glasses that Aunt Marjorie had insisted we use because they had character. Silas leaned against the counter, spinning a glass in his hand as he told a story about a rookie firefighter who once set off the station alarm trying to reheat chili. Thalia sat cross-legged on the rug with Lily, teaching her the words to an old carol while Alyssa hummed along, drying dishes at the sink. I stood in the doorway for a moment just to take it in. My living room, glowing with firelight and laughter, was no longer silent, no longer hollow. Every corner was filled not with obligation, not with judgment, but with choice. People who had shown up because they wanted to. When I carried another tray into the kitchen, Marjorie gave me a knowing look. "See what happens when you open your doors," she said, pressing a dish towel into my hand. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight to answer. Word had already begun to ripple out beyond these walls. My cousin Alyssa scrolled through her phone, shaking her head as she read message after message. "It's spreading," she said, glancing at me. "Some of the family isn't too happy with Celeste right now. People are saying it's cruel what she did. I could hardly process it. For years, Celeste had been untouchable, shielded by my parents, adored by relatives. To hear that others were finally questioning her pedestal felt surreal. I didn't celebrate her fall, but I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction of knowing the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. I sank into a chair near the fire, Lily curling up beside me, her head against my arm. She had been buzzing with energy all evening, but now her eyes drooped with exhaustion. She whispered, "This was the best Christmas, Aunt Ro." I brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered back, "It's the best because you're here." For a long while, I simply sat still listening to the house breathe, the voices overlapping the crackle of logs in the fireplace. It felt like the kind of night that rewrote memory. For once, I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the soldier erased from the picture. I was exactly where I belonged. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud at first, just enough to cut through the sound of laughter. My heart lurched. My parents had already come and gone, their silence leaving a heavier mark than their words. But this knock was different, short, sharp, deliberate. Silas frowned and set his glass down, instinctively moving toward the door. I rose too, motioning for him to stay back. When I pulled it open, the winter air rushed in, stinging cold against my face. Celeste stood on the porch. Her hair was damp, her coat unbuttoned, her eyes burning with something that looked more like desperation than rage. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the party's glow spilling behind me while she stood in the shadow of the night. "I need to come in," she said finally, her voice low but urgent. The words nearly knocked the breath from me. Celeste had never asked to come into my space, not once. Her entitlement had always assumed she belonged anywhere she wanted to be. But tonight there was no entitlement in her voice, only a raw edge I had never heard before. Behind me, the room had gone quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on my back, waiting to see what I would do. I steadied myself, hand gripping the doorframe. "Why are you here, Celeste?" She swallowed hard, her breath visible in the freezing air. "Because they turned on me," she whispered. "Mom, Dad, even some of the cousins, they're blaming me." She faltered, her shoulders trembling as though she couldn't finish the sentence. I waited, the silence stretching taut between us. Finally, she said, "I don't want to be alone tonight." The words hit harder than the cruel text she had sent me days earlier. Here was the golden child, the one who had pushed me out of the frame my entire life, standing on my porch asking not to be left out. 1,000 responses burned on my tongue, anger, satisfaction, questions she had never answered. But Lily's small hand slid into mine, grounding me. I looked down at her wide eyes, then back at Celeste. For the first time, I didn't see the sister who had overshadowed me, but a woman stripped of her armor, asking for something she had never given me. I didn't step aside. "Not yet. You cut me out," I said evenly. "Not just this Christmas. Every time you rolled your eyes, every time you dismissed me, every time you let them ignore me, that was your choice." Celeste flinched, her eyes shining in the porch light. "And now you're here," I continued, "because you finally felt what I've lived with my whole life." For a moment I thought she might snap back, but she didn't. She just stood there, her breath ragged, her pride broken. I didn't invite her in. I didn't slam the door either. I let her stand in that cold space between. When I turned back toward the room, Lily whispered, "What will you do?" I crouched down to her level, my voice low enough for her alone. "I'll decide tomorrow," I said. "Tonight belongs to us." I closed the door gently, leaving Celeste on the porch, and the sound of laughter slowly rose again behind me. The house warmed me instantly, the fire snapping, the voices picking up where they had paused. I raised my glass, catching the eyes of everyone gathered. "Christmas isn't about who sends the invitation," I said, my voice steady now, stronger than I had ever felt in this house. "It's about who chooses to stay." Around me, heads nodded, glasses lifted, smiles returned. The night settled back into joy, but the image of Celeste on the porch lingered at the edge of my mind. A reminder that even the ones who cut you deepest can someday find themselves outside knocking. And as I looked around the room at the family I had built by choice, I knew the table we had made tonight would hold long after the dishes were put away. So I ask you, if you've ever felt pushed aside or erased, who would you invite to your table? And more importantly, who will you choose to stay with?